Welcome back, everybody. Um, I don't know if I could have picked a better day to invite Lisa, Sharon, Harper, and to listen to her wisdom um, as I'm accustomed to receiving. I didn't know a lot about Lisa. There are just so many important voices out there. And I didn't know a lot about her, and I do know that she came to Santa Barbara a few years and was at a conference. Were you not? Didn't you do one here? Maybe not.
I'm sure sometime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're all over the place. But anyway, um, what I'm not going to go through like this whole dossier on you. The FBI can handle that. Um,
Good.
but I mean, you can find info online, as you know, everybody. But I just want to say that um, a year ago, uh, uh, about a year ago, just over a year ago, Kenichi here sent me um, a tweet that Lisa had posted, and it was during the Democratic convention. And
Mm.
I'm just going to read it. It says, "There is still time to change course. I have marveled that not even Rashida Tlaib was invited to speak. How could you allow this, Kamala Harris? This erasure of Palestinian voice betrays a hierarchy of human belonging under the surface of the facade of love and joy. Please correct this mistake before it is too late." And that was on August 22nd at 8:21 a.m. 2024. And when I read that, uh, I knew she was one of us, or we were one of her. uh, and it was refreshing to read that. And you know, I mean, on the other hand, you have people like there's a congressman who said Charlie Kirk would be, if Jesus was alive today, he'd be the 13th disciple. And I told Diane, I said Jesus needed another Judas like he needed a hole in the head. I mean, because that's what that would have been. Anyway, okay, I digress. Um, but it's just so lovely to have you, Lisa, and just take it away. I'm just so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Moore. Thank you so much. It was actually really wonderful to get to know you at the St. Stephen's University residency this year. Um, you are one deep brother. And I mean, and I'm happy to be one of you. And you are certainly one of me, one of us. And so it's wonderful to finally meet each other and to come into communion today. I would love to have permission to share my screen if I could, and that would make it possible for me to move forward. Let's see here. Whoever has permission, ability to give permission to share screen, that would be helpful. Aha, yes, thank you. Okay. So, let's see. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to unshare because I need to check a particular box. There we go. Okay. All right, everybody. So you should see me next to my screen. Is that right? Is that what you see? Okay, wonderful. Um, so I am going to be sharing with you from my book Fortune, which I also, of course, have here today, and I would really encourage you to pick this up. Today's conversation is going to be based in what I found after 30 years of researching my family's story, going back 11 generations to the first people who were not indigenous to touch land here on this turtle island that we now call the US. And what did I find about this construct that we call race, about the need and how to repair it, and about the call and vision of the beloved community. And since the beloved community is a namesake of yours, we just thought that was really appropriate. And this is really a core message for me. Um, so let's begin. Um, I want to start. I want to start by sharing a song with you that my mom used to sing to me as I was a little girl around the time that Roots came out. You guys remember Roots, right? So at night when Roots was on TV live for the first time ever, I believe it was 1978. I think I was 9 years old. She would sing me to sleep. She would sing. No, I couldn't have been nine. It couldn't have been 70. It had to be like 77 at least, because I was still on Walnut Lane, I know by place. She would sing Wade in the Water, and I'm sure you know the song, but it goes like this: Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Mm, 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 mm. God's gonna trouble the water. And what I gleaned from that, what she taught me, was that the people would be in the fields and they would sing that when they knew somebody was going to try to escape to freedom. They were going to try to run north that night. And they knew that in order for them to get north, in order for them to get to freedom, or if they were in the deep south, to get deeper south into Florida or into Mexico, they would need to run through the water. They would need to wade into the water. And the water was dangerous. The water had water moccasins, like poisonous snakes, had alligators the closer you were to Florida, had malaria-ridden mosquitoes. And yet you had to go through the water if you were going to reach freedom. Well, beloveds, the reality for us is that if we are going to reach freedom in our nation, which is suffering under the brutality of fascism right now, if we are ever going to reverse course and create a world where we have the capacity, the ability, and the right to flourish, all of us, then we will have to move through treacherous waters. But the good thing about those waters is that on the other side of them is true freedom. Now, the treacherous things in our waters are the truths of what we have done as a nation, the truths of what has happened to us, the truths of the things that have broken us, the things that have maimed and twisted us, the things that have covered over, even crushed the image of God among us. But the reality is that once we see that truth, once we seek that truth, once we tell that truth, we have a road that has been laid to freedom. So my question to you is, are you ready to walk the road today? Are you ready? Are you ready to wade into the water, per se? Because if you are, I'm ready to. I'm going to go with you. I want to start with Fortune Game McGee, which is the slide you see. This is actually the street where I believe she lived. It's on Game Road. It's the only road in on the eastern shore of Maryland that is named after the Game family. And the Game family most likely lived here. In fact, Fortune likely lived in this house, or at least on this land and a portion of this house back in the day. Why do I say that? Because this land is located at the top of the property that was owned by the person who owned her, by the person who had indentured her and her children and her grandchildren. Fortune Game McGee stood alone in a courtroom on the colonial Maryland's Eastern Shore in 1705. She was born in 1687, and here her mixed race body bore the wrath of the very first um, round of race laws hatched on American soil. Those laws shaped the course of her life and the lives of all of her descendants. Circa 1662 in Virginia, that very first race law was passed, and that was then in the colony one over from where Fortune was born. In Virginia, the story goes back. It goes back to the founding of the colony in 1608. But around 1630, a young girl named Elizabeth Key was born. She was the daughter of Thomas Key, and who was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. And um, he was raping one of his enslaved women. Trigger alert, forgive me. In 1664, Elizabeth got to thinking, I'm sorry, 54, Elizabeth got to thinking, you know, English common law says that if you're a Christian, you cannot be enslaved. And she had been baptized by her father and recognized as his daughter by the colony. The colony forced Thomas Key, her father, to recognize her, and he did. And then he had her baptized again, being forced to do it by the colony. And but citizenship goes through the line of the father, and her father was a British citizen. And according to British law, you could also not enslave another British citizen. So she took her case to court and she won. Fortune won. I'm sorry, Elizabeth won. And a stream of other people, mixed race children who had that exact situation where their fathers were British citizens who had raped one of their enslaved women and bore these mixed race kids, they began to take their cases to court, and they were winning. So there was a stream of people saying, deuces up, peace out, I'm gone, I'm out the plantation. And that is what caused then in 1662 the Virginia House of Burgesses to stop as this legal exodus of free labor began to leave their plantations because they were saying, I'm a citizen. Well, what they did, those House of Burgesses did, they could have in that moment said, you know what? We are going to transition from a slaveocracy or an indenturedocracy into a true capitalist society, even if we wanted to do justice light. Forgive me, that's my dog. Someone just rang the doorbell, so she's going a little crazy. Come here. It's okay. Go to your place. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. So what she says, what they do in that moment, instead of actually becoming a true justice light or injustice light capitalist society, they change where citizenship comes from. And their citizenship now comes through the mother. And they add two words, in perpetuity, which is what creates race-based slavery in America. So then fast forward 2 years in Maryland to 1664. 2 years after that first race law is passed in Virginia, in 1664, the legislature looks around and they say to themselves, we have a problem on the ground. We have to pass a law. Their problem was almost the exact opposite of what was going on in Virginia. In Virginia, it was white men raping enslaved women. In Maryland, it was white women marrying and having the children of enslaved Black men. They couldn't have that because, again, it was disrupting the caste system that was just beginning to take shape. So, what did they do? Instead of, again, even incrementally freeing their people or saying whatever, instead, what they said was, no, we can't have that. Instead, heretofore, if any white woman has the child of an enslaved Black man, she herself shall be enslaved, and her children shall be enslaved in perpetuity. In perpetuity. forever to the nth generation. Now, by the time that Fortune was standing in that courtroom in 1705, the laws had shifted several times, um, some because of convenience, some because of a shift in attitudes about Black people, about people of African descent. Around that time, things were really beginning to clamp down, and the slave laws were becoming more heinous. They were becoming more violent and more absolute because the demographic of Maryland was shifting because of technology. Slave ships had greater technology to bring people directly from Africa to Maryland without passing first through the Caribbean, which had been the norm. And because of that, a stream of people of African descent began to flow into the Maryland colony. And because of that, white folk got scared and began to clamp down on the laws. So when she stood in that courtroom in 1705, the law no longer said white women would be enslaved. Instead, what it said is if your mother is white, you cannot be enslaved. But if your mother has had you out of wedlock, you shall be indentured. If the father is white, then you will be indentured for 21 years. If the father is Black of African descent, then you shall be indentured for 31 years, and the mother for 4 to 7 years. Well, all of Leah's descendants for 3 generations were all indentured. And what I found was that there was a pattern that never, ever in the records did it mention a father. And usually they were indentured for about 21 years, maybe 24, 25, if there was more time added for some bad behavior in the course of their indenture. And so you can actually see that likely they were being raped on the regular in order to produce free labor for their indenturers. These are the original farms, slave farms. We normally look to the time period after the close of the Atlantic slave trade in order to identify the growth and the production of slave farms in the US. But here's the root in the early 1700s in the first colonies. Now, there's a moment in my research that I found on the 1880 census. My second great grandfather, Robert Fortune, whose surname is actually after Fortune Gain McGee, and his wife, Mary J. Bird, lived next door to the Loving family in Caroline County, Virginia. Nearly a century after that, the Loving family challenged Virginia's 1662 race law in the Supreme Court in the case of Loving versus Virginia in 1967. And Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter fell in love, got married, and were thrown in jail. And their Supreme Court win repealed Virginia's 1662 race law and knocked down the laws that banned interracial marriage in 17 states, effectively pulling up the legal root of American racialized hierarchy. The couple's daughter, Peggy, married a Fortune. Yes, she did. When I saw that, that blew my mind. Now I want to share with you about my third great grandmother, Leah. Leah Ballard was born circa 1836 and died in 19, that should say 17, actually, 1917, Camden, South Carolina. And our family believes that she had 17 children. That's the number that's been handed down to us over the years. But when we look on the census data, when we look anywhere, you cannot find the first 5 of those children. They were likely born in the context of enslavement. She was about 25 years old when abolition came in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. And from that point on, she had 12 children. So the first 5 of her children, if true, were erased from the record. And they would be as enslaved people. They were likely sold deep into the South, the deeper South, or they died. One of the things that I found in the research on Leah is that 1 in every 3 children that were born on cotton plantations died before their 16th birthday. And if they were born on rice plantations further south in South Carolina, down by the water, they died before their first birthday. So death was one of the things that characterized enslavement. It was not just hard work, it was death. We never knew Leah's mother's name, and we didn't think we ever would, but we found her death certificate on Ancestry.com. Yes, we did. We found Leah's death certificate, and under the mother's name, it read Hannah Reynolds. When I saw that, I wept. I said, I see you, Hannah. I see you. You see, she had been lost to Leah, but someone knew her name. And they made sure that that name was placed on that death certificate so that we could be reunited with her 5 generations later. But I want to share with you the moment that Leah found out she was free as I imagine it. You see, there was a song that they would sing on the plantation in the midst of doing free labor. They would sing, "Oh, I put on your crown, put on your crown." And the day that Leah was found out that she was free, I imagine that she looked to the trees, that she heard the trees sing, and that she imagined that that singing came from her ancestors, her foremothers, her Yoruba women and Hausa women. As again, DNA from African Ancestry.com traces us back to those women 1,000 years ago. And I imagine her hearing them whisper to her, "Put on your crown, child." And the song is supposed to be sung, but I'm going to do the chant because for me it feels more like a chant, and it goes like this. I come this night for to sing and pray, oh yes, to drive old Satan far away, oh yes, that heavenly breeze in bright and fair, oh yes, and very few can enter there, oh yes, oh wait till I put on my crown, oh wait till I put on my crown, oh wait till I put on my crown. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. If you want to catch that heavenly breeze, oh, yes. Oh, yes. Go down in the valley on your knees, oh, yes. Oh, yes. And bow your knees upon the ground, oh, yes. Oh, yes. And ask your Lord to turn you round. Oh, wait till I put on my robe. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Sharon. Sharon is my mom. She joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1966. She ran church outreach in Philadelphia, which is exactly what I did when I worked for Sojourners, and I had no idea that she had ever done anything remotely like that. She was trained by James Foreman and Diane Nash and befriended Cleve Sellers, and she even dated Stokely Carmichael for like a hot minute. She met him in or dated him in 1966, and it's that same year that Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, um, went down to Mississippi and joined the Meredith March in order to finish the march that had been interrupted when James Meredith was shot down on the second day of his march, that was bringing attention to the fact that more Black people needed to go to college and desegregate UMiss. Stokely Carmichael got into was well he was he the organizers found a great park on that march, and in that park, Broad Street Park, they brought a flatbed truck into the park. He had been Stokely taken by the police earlier that day and held for some time, and then he was released and brought back, and they hoisted him onto the truck. And in the midst of his time, what he did was he raised his fist and he said, "We need some Black power up in here. We need to be able to smash any political machine that comes against us." And Immediately, white people interpreted that to mean that he was calling for violence, but he wasn't. What he was doing was he was saying, we need to resist. We need to resist the lie that says that white people are God, that they get to determine the boundaries of our freedom, that they get to determine the boundaries of our beauty. Carmichael's call was rebellion. Yes, indeed, it was. But it was rebellion against a lie. I'm going to read from the book here on page 140 if you have it and you're following along. It says it was a clarion call for people of African descent to embrace their blackness and their humanness, to embrace the truth that white people are not God. They are merely human. They do not get to determine the boundaries of beauty. They do not get to determine the boundaries of black flourishing. They do not get to shape our own views of ourselves. We determine our worth. We determine the boundaries of our own flourishing. We determine how we will view ourselves. And this self determination is not limited to the realm of cultural and social discourse. It's not only about our ability to make great music or even write great poems. This is about our ability to exercise and to have flourishing that is economic and also political, as well as social and cultural. It is agency. So, how do we repair what this power called race has broken in the world? First, we do it through truth telling, and truth telling is simply confession. It involves truth seeking, truth listening, and then truth telling. Truth seeking requires the humility to know that we do not know all we need to know. And truth listening is a part of the healing process. It is the process of humbling ourselves and sitting at the feet of the ones to whom it has happened, or to their descendants, or to the experts that have risen from that community. And then it involves the telling of the truth that we have heard, the testifying, the giving testimony. And then it is the repair necessitates reparations as an act of repentance. Reparations, all it really is saying we will not walk in the same direction we have been walking. And we are going to do what we can to level the playing field so that we all can play on a level playing field from here to fore. For me, the example of reparations comes from 2 Samuel 21, 1 through 14. In that passage, David is he's really befuddled because there's a drought in the land and they don't know where this drought has come from. And he's like, did I do something, God, as king, that now you've brought a drought on the land? And then he gets this brilliant idea. He says, let me call the Gibeonites. And so he calls the Gibeonites and they have a message for him. They've already had their council meeting. They know exactly what they're going to say to him. And they say, Mr. David, we have a bone to pick with you. Saul, the previous king, not you, but the previous king in the history, in the past, the ones had nothing to do with anybody living today, but this guy who was the leader of your kingdom previously tried to kill all of our people. And he wasn't supposed to do that. David has this aha moment. He goes, that's the reason for the drought. So he says something I can barely imagine us ever saying in the United States, but imagine if we did. He says, what do you say that we must do for you in order for things to be made well for you? And he listens as they speak. And what they say is costly. But he does not ask even one question. He simply does it. And how does God respond to this? God lifts the famine. Reparations is a God concept. It comes to us straight out of the scriptures. And it is a requirement for our healing. And finally, beloved community, Donald Shriver wrote an incredible book called An Ethic for Enemies. And in that book, he talks about The context is World War II. And I take it to post Bosnian or Rwandan war. He says, there has to be a measure of forgiveness in in the way that we interact with each other. I say this is true today, and especially true today, as we have 40% of the country that is supporting the rise of fascism. But even before that, we had 40% of the country who was supporting fascism light in our country. Bishop Desmond Tutu, Archbishop, said that there is no future without forgiveness. And he talked about the concept of Ubuntu. He said, I am because we are. There is no future without us. We cannot just erase each other from the world. So there must be some level of forgiveness in order for us to reach healing as a society. For us in the United States, a lot of that healing is going to have to come from the micro stories of our subjugation. This is a picture of a street in Philadelphia, in South Philadelphia. And where I live in South Philly. And I live one block from where my mom grew up. And when my mom was a child, there were trees that lined the streets in Philly, just like this. But there was a moment in my mom's childhood years. She used to go across the street from her house to the tree across the street, and she would talk to that tree every night. She would say, "Good night, tree." She'd have a conversation with it before she went to sleep that night. And one morning she woke up and it wasn't there anymore. Overnight, they had literally chopped down all of the trees in her community with no warning. There were trees that lined her school, no more trees lining her school. Trees up and down. Now, what happens when you take the trees away? You take away oxygen. You take away uh, the fauna that is going to aerate the air and take particulates out of the air. So you end up getting higher incidence of asthma, heart disease, and other things as people can't go outside as much. You get heat islands. And that is exactly what happened in South Philadelphia. And around the same time, you actually also had a pumping of drugs into South Philadelphia. And the drugs were first heroin and then crack in the 1980s and 90s. And as a result of that policy that was passed down from Nixon into the local governments, you had an absolute gutting of Black communities. This was what it looked like when they took the trees away. And then eventually, after crack took over, the community looked just like this. Now, of course, they are regentrifying the community, and I live in a beautiful home in this same community. But when I saw that, this community no longer looks like it did, the people are no longer here. Half the people, more than half people, are gone or dead in our community. I said, no, 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 no. I got to move in. We need to have some of the people reclaim this land. And so that's why I live here now. My grandmother lived a block away when it looked like this, what you see on your screen. And she ended up passing away because she was beaten to death by a crack addict. So, public policy and the ways that we treat poor people and the ways that we believe in the hierarchies of human belonging and the ways that we have given assent to the practices of eminent domain and other things actually have personal consequences in the lives of the oppressed, the lives of the ones who are dominated. But friends, there is a solution. That's Willa. That's my grandmother. The solution is shalom. The solution is, what does it look like for us to embrace the reality that we are actually, all of us, called into to help build a world where all blesses all, just as our sister said to us earlier. This is a John August Swanson um, print, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's called Psalm 85. It's a picture of the tree of life in the middle of a colorful, ripe field for the harvest. Sunbeams shine down while brown community members play and work in the field and climb the tree. And the verses of the psalm are written between the rows and in the sunbeams. And the passage reads, steadfast love and faithfulness will meet. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Faithfulness will spring up from the ground, and righteousness will look down from the sky. Now, this, if you were to substitute some of the words, when you go in and you actually ask, what do these words really mean? Because usually you can parse them down into a clearer meaning. What it actually ends up reading is merciful kindness and truth will meet. Equity and radical wellness of all relationships in creation will kiss each other. Trustworthiness will spring up from the ground, and justice will look down from the sky. People ask me what it is that I to hope to bring into the world through fortune and through my speaking and things like that. This is what I hope. I hope to bring into the world um, a healed church, a church that is actually moving toward justice, that is wading through the water, facing the truth, seeking the truth, listening to the truth, telling the truth. And when the church does that, I believe, and I'm going to read now from the last page of the book, that there are two paths set before the oppressed in particular. One path leads to rage and compounded pain, sickness and death. The other leads to the beloved community. On that road, there is truth seeking, truth listening, and truth telling. There is reparation and equity, and there is mercy, release. For the sake of my body and soul and the bodies and souls of my family's descendants to the 10th generation from me, I choose the beloved community. For readers in European bodies, you also have a choice. You can continue the war for supremacy against the image of God on earth. You can resist God's beloved community, resist truth, resist equity, resist justice, and resist mercy. You can try to maintain your space at the top of a crumbling racial hierarchy. You will not be there long. You are already in the global minority. And within one generation, 20 years, less than 20 years now, you will be in the minority in the United States as well. And when that day comes, you can wage war or you can lean into truth, lean into repentance and repair, and allow yourselves to be released, forgiven. Only then can we find a new way of being together in the world. And I can almost hear my great seventh great grandmother Fortune Game McGee, who walked this land 10 generations ago and absorbed the wrath of its first race, gender, and citizenship laws into her traumatized body. And in my mind's ear, I hear her whisper to me, yes, child, yes. Amen.
Lisa, thank you so much. Um, that was overwhelming. Can I tell you? That was so, first of all, half the things you said there, I didn't know. I didn't know those things. And that's so it's so like frustrating when you learn these things. You know what I mean? You learn them and then you say, why am I only knowing this now? I'm today years old. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I do know what you mean.
Oh
That's how I
man.
felt when I found them. I was like, how did I not know that Maryland's race law, the first race law came 2 years after Virginia, and it was about white women marrying
Yeah.
black men. How did I not know that they were enslaved by that law for a certain period of time?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did not know that. How did I not know that slave farms have a much deeper root than we knew?
Yeah.
Well, how did we not know? Because that was very purposeful. just
Yeah.
like you said, because because of the moving away from truth. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And then, I was thinking about how, like, my own family, you know, they left Puerto Rico to come to the projects in New York City.
Mhm.
And we're talking downtown New York City, Alphabet City. When I grew up, it was called Fear City.
Mm.
Fear City, you know? It was ghetto. It was slums. You know what I mean? It was awful. And then it became gentrified.
Yep.
You know what a word that is.
Mhm.
Gentrified is another word for redlining,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And then it does create a resentment. Like, when I was growing up in this neighborhood, it was awful. It was full of minorities. You know what I mean? And then the white people, no offense to the white people in the room, they come and, gentrify, and then the rents get higher and higher, and then the people who grew up there can't live there anymore.
Mhm.
Most of those people have passed away, just like you said. But then I think of myself, how from the time I was little, I knew that this environment was not right. It was not right.
Mhm.
There were no trees in the projects, just like you said. There were trees everywhere else, like I knew that being in that place was wrong. This is not how human beings are supposed to coexist.
That's right.
Yeah, so
Did you know
this
that they've done studies recently that show that the more trees there are in a community, the safer the community is? Isn't that something? And the more light there is in a community, the safer the community is. But these are just they should it's almost like the trees watch over. They watch over us. So when you cut down the trees or you zone a community and you don't put trees there, you are saying this community is not worthy of protection. And so we shouldn't be surprised then when it's
yeah.
less safe. It's structural.
Dr. Dave?
Well, thank you for your beautiful and powerful message. Do you happen to know Regent Park in South Philly?
Yes, yes.
My brother lived on Regent Park.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh.
He used to walk to his office at Penn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Regent Park is not that far from where I live. And
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, it really isn't. I'm right here in South Philly in the heart of it. And I'm one block from where my family was for almost 70 years
Uh,
um, after moving north from South Carolina. So I hear you. And most of the people in South Philly actually are from South Carolina, which is funny. The black folk. Almost everybody came up in the Great Migration and kind of made space for each other. And then the Italians moved in, right? And then the Irish and from there.
it's a
So
great neighborhood.
it is. It really is.
So you mentioned reparations, and 10 years or so ago, I thought maybe we might actually start seeing some things happen
Mhm.
in terms of reparations. But so you've clearly given thought to it, and I'm interested in your thoughts. What would 40 acres and a mule look like in the 21st century?
Oh, that's really good. It's a great question. Well, I am not an economist, so I'll start with that, right? So I would say really important to watch the work of William Darity. Dr. William Darity is really like the foremost economist whose work on reparations has actually set the bar for that conversation economically. One of the things that he says that's very clear, and I talk about this in the book, is that if 40 acres and a mule was given, there would be no need for reparations now. And so
Right.
one of the things that we have to ask, I mean, in my conversations with people in this sphere, not only in the U.S. but also in spaces like Brazil and South Africa, one of the things people are pushing us to do is to not only think about the pay that our ancestors didn't get, right, but also the land that they lost over the time and what was the worth of the land then, and what is the value of the wealth that could have been accumulated over all of those years since? That is the measure of the reparation that is deserved.
Vast.
That's what repair would require.
Mm.
And we have many examples of this. Um, uh, in the U.S. pantheon of oppressed people, people of African descent are the only ones who have never gotten any form of reparation for anything. We've never received reparations as a people group. There are in every other people group, and I think limited, so in limited number, but there have been forms of reparation, never in the case of African Americans. And I honestly think part of the reason for that is because the cost is so great that there is a fear that the really among white folk that they could not remain on top if they did give reparations what was deserved. And I actually think that's true. But what it would do is it would level the playing field so that we could all be equal, or at the very least equitably distributed across um, across the citizenry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Miss Diane Fox?
I really don't have anything to say except thank you so much and blessings on your work and may it continue strong and loud. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Ms. Fox.
Pastor Diane, did you have something you wanted to share?
No, I'm just moderating.
I saw
Thank
you
you. But
unmuted.
it was awesome. Just
Okay.
awesome.
I hadn't thought about the Gibeonites, and this whole past week, what I have been thinking about is something that David's response that kind of I I've been feeling the over 1 million souls in the Atlantic, uh, particularly intensely over the past um, past few days, and I feel, and maybe you have a response to this, but um, I feel like they still speak.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what I was going to talk about next Sunday. The blood of Abel still speaks,
Mhm.
and so I just feel like not just them, those souls in the Atlantic, those captive souls, but also the very waters themselves. You know, the I feel like the earth. I feel like those trees
Yes,
are,
they cry out.
those trees that were cut down.
Mhm.
I feel like they are bleeding, um,
Mhm.
and calling for justice. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. It's funny because redemption happens in the micro actions that we take. It's not always government, and especially now, it's not going to be government that does it. It's not. And so the truth is that any body, any governing body, whether that's a nonprofit organization, a church, a denomination, a store, I mean, any group can actually do the work itself of the truth seeking, truth listening, truth telling, and then reparation for the ways that they have contributed to the break over the years. There are churches that have been in conversations with the indigenous people that never did cede the territory that their church now stands on, and have gone to. I was a part of this actually in Los Angeles when I was there. I went to the Tongva people as we were about to put on a conference, and I recognized them that they are the rightful stewards of Los Angeles. And I just simply asked their permission to hold a conference on their land. And it turned out that that recognition of their spiritual authority in the land, it actually created a tumult inside of the Tongva. They had never had anybody ask them for permission before. And suddenly they started to take their own authority seriously, and they offered that permission. And I came back to them several other times to ask permission to do stuff, and they were like, "Look, you have a blanket, yes. You don't
Mm.
have to come back to us every time. You can do whatever you want." We're like, "Oh, okay, thank you." But that recognition is a part of the healing. That's part of the repair. Is the repair of the right relationship we should have with one another. Um, it's a different part of repair for people of African descent. I think that for churches, especially because we tend to exploit labor in churches, we tend to not pay folk, the whole thing. Um, that there's a way that we need to ask the question: how have we fallen into the patterns of exploitation that have their roots in slaveocracy in the U.S.? And how are we not valuing workers' rights, the value of their work, and what are we saying about them as the value of as human beings, as people made in the image of God, when we do not pay people according to what their work is worth? Um, and and likewise, what are the ways that we support, champion, protect um, the rights of the people who go to our churches? Or do we only think of our church as what happens on Sunday morning? I know this church is not one of those, but that's a part of the repair, is for churches and other civic bodies to engage in the process, to become a part of the citizenry that helps to shape public policy, by letting your voices be heard, um, to your local officials.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have often felt like that the largesse of the people um, who are here and some others are in a way providing reparations through representational reparations to Diane and me in particular. Um,
Mm.
and so I embrace it. I don't feel guilty about uh, getting paid. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah, no,
I just
absolutely.
I see it as representational reparations, and
Yeah.
and it's especially people here, but there are others.
Hmm.
Matt, change maker Matt.
Hey, Lisa, so great to see you again. I saw you in Chicago at a conference, the Liberating Evangelicalism and Justice Conference, and so
Oh,
appreciated you each time I've been in space with you. So,
thank you.
um, I too am doing reparations work. After I went to Eastern University out there in your
Hmm.
city,
Hmm.
and worked with Trick Boyd and Kimberly Johnson, and
Fabulous.
my whole work was around reparations. What does the path look like, and
Hmm.
particularly for Christian folk, and extending the work of James Foreman in the Black Manifesto. And so I've really taken that work seriously, created kind of an organization that isn't quite public yet, but I learned something called the satisfactory phases of reparations.
Mm.
And it's the five like early points before the truth telling, which I find to be very important for truth telling to go well.
Mhm.
And it's the
Mm.
reckoning, re-education, demonumentalizing, undoing harmful policy, and then truth telling,
Mm.
or you can say the public repentance.
Yeah.
And so, I try to building power towards holding local ceremony here, healing ceremonies, repentance ceremonies.
Mm.
And I guess I have two kind of questions.
Sure.
One is in the Christian world, especially around this conversation, Christians don't often like to address the point that the first rule of colonization was Christianity. You briefly mentioned it, but it was like they were able to colonize because it was not seen as a Christian land, and they were able to
Right.
enslave because they were not Christians.
Right. That's
And
the
so
discovery.
the
Hmm.
Christian supremacy aspect, as we named at the Liberating Evangelicalism conference,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
is very important in this freedom work, because not only are we repairing reparations of the legacy of enslavement, but it's also the legacy of colonization. So those both need
Right.
to be named by the church.
That's good. That's really good.
And so I'm curious how to do how to walk and chew gum at the same time, and I hear you're part of and this is I'm doing this work also with our local Chumash people here, and deeply in relationship with them and support, but it's I think just more for the greater narrative maybe. So I think that's
What
like
do you
one.
mean? What do you mean by walk and chew gum? What's the walk and
Oh,
what's the chewing
the
gum?
uh indigenous reparation and legacy the reparations for enslavement.
So let me dive into that. For Indigenous people, generally speaking, it's going to be restitution that you're talking about. It's restoring what was taken, and restoring at least some level of some versions, not versions, some level of recognition of and true sovereignty over themselves, their families, their land. Um, and so restitution is really the conversation when you're engaging with Indigenous people.
Mhm.
Reparation is, generally speaking, the conversation that you're going to have among people of African descent. But both of them actually trail back to colonization.
Yeah.
Neither of them would be an issue without colonization.
Oh,
You don't
absolutely.
mind? Hold on one second. My dog got locked out.
Acted out.
She
Yeah.
went out there. Yeah, I locked her out, and now she's been acting up. So let me just open the door for her, and then I'll be right back. Hold on. Come on in. Yep, I see you. Yeah. Okay, so go lay down. Um, so when we talk about race, this is, I think, one of the largest things that has gotten us to dead ends in our conversations about race in the US, is that it usually stays inside of the silo of race.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about Native American people, people like shut down the conversation altogether because nobody wants to give back their land, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
what we don't understand, what we tend to not understand, that if we did, it would change everything,
mhm,
is that all of it is broken because of the broken relatedness between nations,
mhm.
because of and I don't stop actually at Pope Nicholas V's, Romanus
Yeah.
Pontifex, which is the
Yeah.
thing that set
Yeah.
the foundation for doctrine discovery. But you
Mhm.
actually have to take it back to Plato.
Mm, mm, mhm.
um,
Yes,
Plato and
Republic.
Aristotle, right? The Greek philosophers, under in another a scholar who does an amazingly great job at this and working this out, who's spent his life really kind of working this out, is Randy Woodley, who I think you
Yeah.
actually had
Yeah.
had speak to you. He's one of my dearest friends and
Mm,
longtime mentors. And what I have learned by listening and learning from him is that the reality is that the Greek philosophers, through dualistic thinking, were the ones who created the human non-human dialogical, like the human non-human hierarchy of human belonging. And it was the roots of it were sown through Plato when he in Plato's on politics, on his big treatise. I'm
mhm.
sorry, Plato's Republic. It was Aristotle's on politics. Um, in Plato's Republic, he pontificated on what is race, and he said it's these different people groups are made of different metals, and each people group is created to serve society in a particular way. And so it's debatable about whether or not he had hierarchy in mind. Some people say
Mm,
yes, other people say no. But Aristotle, his student, it only took 10 years for Aristotle to come out and say, yeah, yes, it's hierarchical.
mhm.
He slammed the barbarians, saying that if you have been conquered, you have proven that you were created to be enslaved. That's what Aristotle said. So when Pope Nicholas V comes out with Romanus Pontifex in 1452, 53, 54, depending on the year that you're looking at it, There were several there. He's not actually referencing scripture. I mean, he might be referencing or thinking about fallen times in scripture, like when you actually have colonization in scripture, and wrongfully saying, see, it's in scripture, so therefore it's okay. But actually, what you see is you see him going right back to Plato and Aristotle when he says, if you come across land that is not Christian, you have the right to claim that land
Mm.
and therefore and enslave its people.
Mhm.
And later it was like, even if they are civilized, even if there are people on that land, you have the right
Mhm.
to claim it. So that is the thread that has wound its way, and that is what created the age that Europeans call the Age of Enlightenment, which I call the year of or the age of colonization. It was the
Mhm.
age of going someplace, taking control and saying, we should be in charge here, and then
Mhm.
taking charge. That's what happened in Africa. They took charge of our bodies. They took charge of our families when they
Yeah.
separated us. They took charge of our minds over 300 years, 300, 350, 400 years now.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a colonization of our minds.
Mhm.
So the deepest root of all of this is colonization.
Yes. Yes.
Um, it's not race or colonization, it's colonization,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
race is a tool of colonization,
Colonization.
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
racialization of people groups is
Yeah.
how they separated us and conquered us.
Yeah.
When you talk, Lisa, uh, we should just point out that it keeps getting reinforced. I mean, the propaganda, the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, not just through textbooks, but through all kinds of media. And I was thinking about the epic pseudo historical film 300 that came out several years ago,
Wow.
that reenacted
Yeah.
the Spartans against the Persians. And if you pay attention to that movie, the Persians look just slightly less than human as a Spart. I
Wow.
mean, it's digital, but I mean,
Wow.
but it just reinforces the idea of foreignness, of barbarianness,
Mm-hmm.
thinking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the only way that this is able, in fact, I'm writing about this right now. The only way that this is able to stand is that enough of us believe it's true.
Mm.
Enough of us have actually
Oh.
believed the lie.
Mm. Mm.
And I think all of us have to search our hearts to root out the lie that still has a seed in there, because we've all been soaking in it since birth
Mhm.
and before.
Well,
And not
yeah,
only
because
those, mhm.
I was just going to say, when I'm thinking of the souls at the bottom of the Atlantic, there's complicity on the African side.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
and so it's a testimony to all of creation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. Although I have to say, they had no idea that they
What was going to
were
happen next?
that they were they were a part of this system. They had never seen a system quite like this before. Um, yeah, the only system they knew in terms of slavery was um, the Arabic enslavement system,
Yeah.
and that was actually one that was much more like indenture
Mhm.
than enslavement, the way that it came to be in the Western Hemisphere. So
There was still humanity.
there was still a sense of humanity of the person, and in fact, they weren't enslaved for life. They were usually did some level of some
3 to 5
term, and they
years.
were set free. Yeah.
David, do we have time for one more question? I can hold it.
Well,
Wait,
Julius has his hand up.
Oh, Julia says, okay, great.
Good morning, and thank you uh, for that wonderful sermon. And I always enjoy listening to the discussions because it gives me ideas in terms of how I can add to the thinking. And um, one thing you just said a moment ago highlighted to me that race and racism, um, it, it serves a function for colonialism, for the settler colonialism, meaning it's not just some random occurrence or an act of God that that shaped how the indigenous people were robbed of their land and how enslaved Africans were assigned to be a race. And oh, we've got Francisco again.
Hello.
Mhm.
Hi.
So,
Hello.
Hi there.
Mhm.
and you may know Professor Barbara Fields. Um, her her writing has really shaped my thinking on race, and she uses this example in her very it's like a seminal article she wrote in 1990 called "Slavery, Race, and Ideology in the United States of America," and
Wow.
she juxtaposes how the U.S. Supreme Court treated a case wherein Jewish and Arab Americans were attempting to use the various civil rights laws to their advantage. And the question was, well, race, how do you, are Jews and Arabs a race? And here's how Professor Fields kind of teases out the problem with how Supreme Court answered it. So I'll set it up. I'm just quoting from the article. In May of 1987, the Supreme Court had to decide whether Jewish and Arab Americans could seek relief under civil rights law for acts of discrimination against them. Instead of taking its stand on the principle that discrimination against anybody is intolerable in a democracy, the court chose to ask whether Jews and Arabs are racially distinct from Caucasians. If so, then civil rights laws forbidding racial discrimination might be applied to them. She continues, the court decided that because Jews, Arabs, and a variety of other nationalities were regarded as racial groups in the late 19th century, they may therefore be considered so today. In other words, the court knew of no better way to rectify injustice at the end of the 20th century than to re-enthrone the superstitious racial dogma of the 19th century. So
That's right.
one of the assumptions of race that's central to the American system is that there is really only one race, the Negro race.
Mm.
And Ms. Field says, and I'm quoting her, that is why the court had to perform intellectual contortions to prove that non-Negroes might be considered members of races in order to receive protection under laws forbidding racial discrimination. So you have this settler colonial enterprise that was launched by Europe. And the Catholic Church is responding to that, as we've mentioned, the Pope saying, when you encounter these new lands, these new peoples, you can conquer and dominate them. And they begin to do so. But they run into a problem. There's too much land and too few laborers. And initially, they tried indentured servitude of other Europeans. But
And
that
Native
led
Americans.
to, and Native Americans. But when the Native Americans fled because they knew the terrain, they brought other Europeans as indentured servants. But that raised a contradiction because these other Europeans that were indentured servants, they came from Europe, where people that looked like them actually had rights. And so you would have class conflict begin to arise between the indentured servants and their masters, if you will. To resolve that conflict, introduce Africans. And to justify the treatment of these Africans lesser than the indentured Europeans, you deem them separate and apart from humanity. They are something different. They are another race. Hmm? In so doing, it is doing work that'll justify the super exploitation of their labor. Same with the indigenous peoples. You have to dehumanize them. You have to describe them almost as if they were animals in order to rationalize and justify the theft of their land. In other words, racism, dehumanization, it is doing work for the project of settler colonialism.
Yes.
And I just wanted to just add that piece because when you your sermon when you began in the middle of it, there was this discussion about laws that were starting in Virginia. Um, um, the children of the I'm not even going to use the word mixed race, the mixed ancestry. Some
Yeah.
were right. The children between Euro-American males and enslaved African women. So they had European ancestry and African ancestry. Virginia had to make a law, right, to say you don't just automatically become a citizen just because your father was of European descent. And then they went further, as you described, to say that the women of European ancestry, if they had the temerity to have the children of enslaved Africans, not only would their children not be free, if you will, but the women themselves would then become enslaved. Not because they felt that women of European descent were lesser than, but to protect this social structure that is a mechanism of how the whole economy was structured.
So
So
can I respond to
yeah, go
that?
ahead. Yes, go
There's
ahead.
there's a big piece here that I think well, I just want to respond to. First of all, yes. I mean, and I do need to read that. I haven't read her book, her work yet. But what I would say is that I think that the notion that blackness is the only race, I don't agree with. I actually I think that I think that when you look at history, it challenges that notion. The very first census, the very first US census only had one race, and it was white. There was no black even mentioned on the census. It just said white, slave, other. That was the first census in 1790. Then in that same year, 1790, they had the very first Immigration Act. And the very first Immigration Act said only white men of good character can become citizens of the United States. Women couldn't become a citizen, and white men who were non-Christian, because that's what good character meant, was Christian. So I think that it's a fuller picture of race when you understand it as hierarchy of people groups, not only the identification of one people group as the race, as race. But that said, I think that when you trace it back to those first laws, I think the reason why those first laws are so important is because they didn't have a conception yet of race being a color thing. The people who were indentured were white, Native American, and Black. They were all being indentured. In 1619, very few of those people were actually enslaved. Most of them were indentured. I talked with their descendants in what is now called Hampton, Virginia. That's where it was called Point Comfort at the time. That's where that ship, the White Lion, landed. They have the graveyard still to this day of the original, was it 29 and odd Angolan men who came off of that ship. And so the reality that is that they were not actually enslaved, they were indentured. But it did not take long. That was 1619. Elizabeth Key was born in 1630, enslaved, right? she was enslaved. That's how many years? Like 11 years later. It's like not that far. Or 21. I'm so bad with math on the fly. So her case and the subsequent cases where they began to lose their free labor, and then when they came down in 1662, that was the point when they wrote that first race law ever on this land. And I think it's worthy to understand. Thank you, Barbara Fields. It is it is worthy to understand. It's worth understanding that that first race law was also the very first gender-based law on American soil that had anything to do with gender. It was also the very first citizenship law. So citizenship and race are intricately intertwined. That's why we can look at what the Trump administration is doing in their white supremacist rubric. And one of their things, one of their primary things that they are able to go after is, quote, non-citizens, right? And kick them out. Because regardless of whether or not they understand them to be a race, Latinos, which they actually don't, they think of Latino as being an ethnicity, right? And white or black is the race, right? Um, the but what they have done is they have racialized them. They have casted them in a lesser stance, which they can do because it traces back to that first race law, which said that if you are not a citizen, you can be exploited, which was the reason why they shifted where citizenship came from and made it come through the mother as opposed to the father. Because if it comes through the mother, you are not a citizen because you are enslaved. It's circular logic. You see that? But because you're not a citizen, you can be enslaved. And because you're not a citizen, your descendants to the nth generation can also be enslaved. And who does that benefit? Settler colonists, right? So in a I think that coming out with absolute either or dualistic understandings of of race is not, I don't think it's that helpful. I think it's more helpful to understand this was a process that was working itself out through law, and this is where we've landed. But where we've landed has its roots there. You can see it in clear, pure form in 1662.
Well,
Kenichi.
I just I would highly recommend Miss Fields because I was just nodding along to everything you said, and I think it would her work would very much complement what you're saying,
I will.
because maybe the way I'm describing it, as you're receiving it, you're seeing it one way, but I think you'll see the nuance in her 1990 article, and she wrote another book. I think it came out in 2014 called Racecraft. I haven't read it,
Oh,
but I think it was
yes.
a more unpacking of that theme that she
Mm-hmm.
started in 1990. But
Okay.
I am nodding along with everything you said because I think it complements what Miss Fields
Thank
is
you.
saying as well.
Thank you for
Yeah,
raising it. I can't wait to read it, actually. Thank you.
yeah.
So
Let's hear from
yeah,
Kenichi. Oops.
let's finish up with Kenichi, and then we'll have communion, and let everybody go do what you were planning on doing later.
All I wanted to add is, as we were, talking about all this, and thank you, Lisa, for helping us process and digest, and to thank you for everybody who contributed to the discussion. I'm thinking, isn't what we are talking about replicated in Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yes.
Zionist treatment of
Hmm.
Palestinians.
Yes.
I exactly, and I often wondered, is that why US and Israel are stitched together?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Can I speak to that very quickly before we
Please.
close? Yes. Yes. Um, what you see happening in Israel right now and Palestine is you see the clearest manifestation on the face of the earth of whiteness, of the power that we call whiteness, not white people, but whiteness. And it's funny that you mentioned, Julius, you mentioned the question of whether Jews can be white, being settled around 1990 in the Supreme Court. The reality of the state of Israel, because of its establishment by Britain and the US, the two largest imperial powers on the planet, in the latter part of the 20th century, really. What you find is that what I find is when I look at the dynamics of impunity, of military violence in order to subjugate, of two-tiered system of citizenship inside of Israel, let alone the ability for them to squash a people group, you actually are finding in pure form the outcome of America's and Britain, ultimately it goes back to Britain, legal rubric of whiteness. And so, and it's not only legal, of course, it works its way out in everything: social, economic, spiritual, religious, rubric of whiteness. And so, yes, when we look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine today, we're looking at whiteness in its purest form, I think, because we're looking at colonization.
Yeah, well, that's where you started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Lisa. Thank you, Kenichi, for your question there, and Julius and everybody, Matt. Yeah, this has been a precious time, and sometimes I think about how we have we especially of late we have conversations that delve into this. I mean, maybe someone like Julius, who's only been coming a few weeks, might think this is all we talk about, but apparently it has floated to the surface of our consciousness, and it needs to be faced. And I think it needs. Yeah, and an interesting thing is that I'm glad to be among people who welcome this conversation, um, because I have to say that we as African Americans, this conversation is like all day, every day. I mean, what I mean is that we witness ourselves as outsiders to a white world. All right, that's how we witness the world. That the world can have conversations and just use tokenize African Americans to make it look legit. Whether it's a TV commercial or whatever it is, you got to have somebody black in there. I'm amazed that the series Friends was able to get away with not doing that, because that's an exception. But we're always outsiders, and the fact is that we've been trying to tell you all. I mean, we saw the country going down this road, and we've been trying to tell the world, we've been trying to tell the country. And so as we come to communion here, let me just say that there are not as many degrees of separation as we would be made to believe. That we are candidates for beloved community, right? And even people that that may not feel like they're there yet, they are. Some of us are just closer. I mean, you all have heard me remark the paucity of degrees of separation between David Daniels, Reggie Williams, Christina Cleveland, and myself. You might not know, but Lisa Sharon Harper has Reggie as her dissertation advisor. So, I mean, we're connected, not even consciously at first, right? We find out that we're connected as we go. And I'm saying that we are all connected in ways that we don't even realize. We are, I mean, just because you don't know, just like Julia was saying earlier that I didn't know all this stuff, right? There's a whole lot of stuff none of us know about all of our ancestries. We are connected. Even though, our species is hundreds of thousands of years old in some form, we are all connected. So let's do communion as a testimonial. If you would, just whatever you have on hand, if you got a graham cracker or whatever, but let us eat and drink and testify to the fact that we are one. Yeah, I'll drink to that.